In today's show, we're going to be talking about 5 photography practices that are just way overused. Hey everyone, welcome into Magnolia Photography SC. I'm Jeff House, wildlife photographer in Charleston, South Carolina. Before we jump into today's show, don't forget to head down to the show notes. And if you are looking to pick up any of the software offered by DxO Photolab, you can use my link with my discount code Magnolia to receive 15% off any of your purchases. And while you're here, please consider subscribing to the channel. Be on the lookout for a special giveaway during the month of May here in 2025. And thank you to DxO Photolab for sponsoring this giveaway. We are going to be giving away a full version of DxO Photolab 8. So be sure to check it out and submit your entry today. Let's talk about those 5 things that you could be doing in your photography and they're ruining your photos very likely. And it's definitely some things that are overused by many photographers. So let's talk about those. And number 1 on today's list is the use of cropping. Many photographers overcrop and really degrade the overall quality of their images. Now, we know as wildlife photographers that cropping is usually an essential part of the creative process because there are many reasons preventing us from getting closer to our subject. So we have to often use cropping in order to bring that subject closer to the viewer. But many photographers are shooting with a little lack of purpose, if you will. And in the end, they're having to crop more than they really should. And it's really degrading the images. Now, when we start talking about image quality and degrading of the images, we're not really talking about if you're using the photos on social media, right? If you're using it on Instagram or Facebook or whatever platform you like, because we know that most of these photos will be consumed by people on their cell phones. And because we're looking at them on those small screens, even the small pictures of our images that are severely degraded because of overcropping, it's going to be hard to tell that on that cell phone screen. That small image is still going to look relatively decent. But I think that we really need to be looking at this from another perspective. Yes, most of our stuff is consumed online, but let's talk about printing, right? You may create photos that you want to display on the walls of your home. Maybe you have some friends and family that would like to purchase some of your photos to display them on the walls in their home, or perhaps you even get some strangers, some clients that want to purchase your work. If you have overcropped and reduced the quality of that image to a point of really limiting you from a printing standpoint, well, you're in a little bit of trouble. So we really got to pay attention to how much we're cropping and what types of images we're capturing. Let's jump into DxO and take a look at an example. Okay, so last week I did a couple of videos from Boone Hall Plantation here in Charleston, and this is an image that I took with this video in mind. So what I did here is I was standing on the side of the pond, and this wood duck was in the water, kind of swimming towards me a little bit, and I captured this image from a distance that was really far away. Now, if we were in the real world scenario, just so you're aware, there was no way that I could get closer to this wood duck. If I had tried to move forward, well, that would have placed myself in those alligator infested waters. And yeah, not happening for me. If you want to take that risk, you want to take on that danger, that's up to you. I'm not doing that. Could I have gone left or right? Was there any other directions I could have gone that would have possibly opened up some positions that would have gotten me closer to this wood duck? And unfortunately, there was not. I could have moved left and right, but neither of those options would have provided any benefit from a getting closer standpoint. So it was either take the photo as is or not take the photo at all. Now, personally for me, I did this for demonstration purposes, but if this was a real life scenario, I would have not taken this photo. I would have skipped this opportunity because I know in the back of my mind, no way, I'm going to have to crop just way too much in order to bring this subject closer in the frame. So I would have either tried to wait patiently for that wood duck to continue swimming towards me where it would have came into a reasonable range, or like I said, I would have just skipped the picture altogether. But let's take a look what would happen in a real life scenario if you were to take this picture at this distance and then crop it later on. So what I did is I just created a virtual copy of this image and brought it down to, somewhere where we might see a reasonable crop to bring this subject into a better view. But when we do this, here is what is happening to the photo. The original photo at the great distance is 50 megapixels. But after we cropped it to create this view, we've now brought our image down to around 7 megapixels. Well, that is going to severely limit us what we can do from a printing standpoint, right? We might be able to get a decent quality print, an okay quality print, maybe 11 by 14, but this would really be better served for 5 by 7s, 8 by 10s, and prints along those sizes. Well, if you want to hang this in your home, if someone wants to purchase it from you and hang it in their home, that is not the print size that they're going to be looking to buy, right? Most people are looking to purchase at least a 16 by 20 image. If you have an 8 megapixel image, a 7 megapixel image, or even less, that is not going to work from a printing standpoint. So what I encourage you to do when it comes to cropping and taking your photographs when you're out in the field, don't think about it in terms of sharing these photos online and thinking, oh, I can just crop the hell out of it because I know that most of these are going to work online. Think about it in terms of printing the photos, right? Think about the terms of those types of applications so that you shoot for the best quality possible. Number 2, and that is shooting your photographs without regard to composition. Now, I see this all the time from a lot of newer photographers and even some intermediate photographers. They go out to take some wildlife photos, and maybe we're looking at something like this here with the wood duck once again. And this is what people do, right? We can, for the purposes of this discussion, again, we can assume that the wood duck is closer than it actually is in this particular picture. Let's just say that, the wood duck swam closer to us and we captured a picture and maybe it was more along this lines, that we had, right? This is what people do though. They don't shoot with composition in mind. They just kind of put the subject in the center of the frame. They capture a picture and they think to themselves, you know what, I'll just worry about the composition later on when I'm cropping the photo in my favorite photo editor. Well, couple of things, right? Let's shoot for the composition that we want. So with this particular image, we do have a wood duck that is looking in the general direction of our camera. So I think that if you wanted a center composed image here, I think you could get away with it. Personally, I would favor something that's a little bit more to the right side of the frame just because of the way he's looking. That's just my personal taste on this image. Your personal taste may differ somewhat, but I would shoot this image if I was out there in real life, favoring the wood duck on the right-hand side of the frame. And then later on, when I take that image into post-production, then I can use cropping just to fine-tune, right? Drill down a little bit and fine-tune my final composition. But I think if you kind of take that approach, you will find that in many cases, you will be able to get away with minimal cropping because your subject will already be composed where you want it. So that can be beneficial later on when it comes to limiting how much you're cropping and getting the best quality from your images. Number 3, and this has been a debate since I began my photography career back in 2012, even when I was in wedding photography. This was something debated by photographers even way back then, and I still think it holds true today. So many photographers rely on the use of background blur to create their images because there is this belief. I don't know where it comes from, but there is this belief that if you're a professional photographer, a way to demonstrate your professionalism is to create pictures with very blurred backgrounds, right? The use of bokeh. Well, you know what? There are many times in wildlife photography and other genres of photography as well, where blurring the background to the point of it being obliterated, where you really can't make out any detail in the background. There are many times where that is a great tool, a great way to capture an image. And I think if we look at this image right here of this wood duck, he was kind of flying towards me and a little bit to my left, obviously, but he was flying into a tree that was not far from my position. And of course, he's opening up his wings because he's preparing to land, so he's slowing himself down. But I love this image, right? The whole background, obviously we know it's vegetation because it's green and we know we're outside and all of those good things. But the background is obliterated, right? We can't see that there's any detail in the leaves or trees or whatever's going on in the background. All that detail is gone, and we've really isolated our subject. The other thing that I love about this photo is how the green background plays with the colors in the wood ducks. I think there's a nice complement there, and I think it just serves to really enhance the image. But is blurring the background something you should do with every photo? And the answer is no, especially in wildlife, because oftentimes the habitat that the bird is in or the details coming from the background can also serve to enhance the photo. Let me show you what I mean. So a few seconds later, after this wood duck came flying in to land on the branch, it did. And this is the image that I caught just a few minutes later. So if I was looking at this image, there is no way for me that I would want this background blurred as much as the image when he was flying in. For me, I love the details that come from the tree and all this green Spanish moss that's hanging down. And I love how these leaves look kind of like ivy, right? Growing on the side of this tree. And to me, this gives the viewer context. It gives it story. It gives it some imagination because of the fact that we have some detail present in the photo. So this is a great way to incorporate those background details by not blurring them out. Yes, there's a very small blur that is occurring on those background items, but not enough where we're losing detail. And so this is something that we need to understand as photographers. We don't need to blur out everything. So many photographers want to do that because they really don't know how to isolate their subject any other way other than blurring out the background. Or they may be struggling from a composition standpoint, and so they figure if they blur the background, they're going to isolate the subject, and that will make up for any shortcomings they have with creating an interesting composition. So that is really what I want to stress in this point. Don't think that you need to blur out every photo. Don't be afraid to include background elements to give that habitat, to give that story to the viewer. They can play a vital role in your overall images, and it's really going to give you a much better portfolio, a more well-rounded portfolio. Number 4, and that is photographers who shoot everything very, very tight. Now, I, as much as anybody, love a beautifully composed, tight image of something in wildlife, right? Take this ibis, for example. I love how close we are to the subject, right? We get to see a lot of great detail out of this bird. Now, we may see this bird flying around in everyday life here in South Carolina. We may have never seen one before, whatever the case. The fact that it's frozen in time and we have a beautiful tight shot allows us to go ahead and look at this photo and kind of absorb and digest all of the unique details that come with this particular creature, right? So I think that is pretty cool from a photography standpoint and a viewer standpoint. But let's not lose sight of some of the other things that are going on. And this is going to kind of touch on the blurring of the background too, right? We can look at this photo as a viewer and go, okay, this is pretty cool, right? We have a nice close-up of this ibis. I appreciate the detail coming from the bird. Look at that vegetation, right? That he's kind of standing in. That's pretty cool. That's kind of neat. But I don't think the imagination is able to go as far as if we had not shot this as tight or cropped it as tight. Let me take a look at another example to show you what I mean. What if we backed off on zooming in on this particular ibis, right? And had something that was composed more in this regard, right? This is not nearly as tight, but I would still argue that we still have a bird that is positioned in the frame, right? As far as overall composition, as well as closeness to the viewer, and which we can appreciate the detail of the subject. But for me, looking at this particular image, now that we've stepped back a little bit, I can go, oh, okay, so that green vegetation is actually in some of that water, right? So it looks like he's in some sort of, we can tell that he's in some sort of water structure. He's in that vegetation. There's some high grass in the background there. We can clearly see that there's, on the right-hand side here, we can clearly see that we have some sort of tropical plant going on, right? We can see the leaves of like the palm trees. And we just get this more telling story from this image than we do the tight one. So this is why it's so important when we're out taking photos in the field that we want to shoot wide, shoot medium, and shoot tight. If we're doing some sort of photo book or we're creating some sort of slideshow, we'll have those 3 photos, and we can start with the wide one to give the viewer a lot of context as to where we are, what's happening, what's going on. And then we can shoot medium so that we can kind of bring in some of that detail. And then we can shoot really tight to bring out even more detail of our subject. So these are great ways to go about it. But don't think that you need to shoot everything like this where it's super, super tight. There is a great feeling that comes from these shots. There's a whole nother level of intimacy as we get closer to our subject. And I love the use of that. But you wouldn't want every single picture you take to be tight like this. Get varying angles of views of your subjects. Number 5 is the overuse of a creative vignette. Now, why do I say creative vignette? Well, most of the editing programs that you're going to be working with will have corrections for lens vignetting, right? Now, every lens tends to have some kind of vignetting going on with it. Obviously, cheaper lenses tend to have a more severe vignetting, while the higher quality lenses tend to reduce those effects. But the problem with lens vignetting is that we can't control how it affects an image, right? There's no way that we can change the center point or how much it's coming in towards our subject or how much it's going away from our subject. There's absolutely no control over it. So that's why we want those protections in place to minimize the effects of lens vignetting. But what we want to do with our photos is add a creative vignette. Now, not every photo is necessarily going to require a vignette. If I have photos that are super bright and airy, maybe something on the beach, chances are I'm not going to add a vignette because the effect becomes a little bit more obvious. But something like this, where we have an eastern bluebird sitting on a tree, this is a nice photo to add a vignette. But we have to be careful with how much of the effect we apply. And this is something that I see so many photographers just overdo, and it becomes super obvious that you have a vignette on it, and that becomes distracting to the viewer. There is a fine line between a good vignette, which will register in the viewer's mind, but they really won't know why, And all of a sudden they find that they're just drawn into the subject in the frame, right? And they're thinking to themselves, wait, what a good picture this is, right? But again, they don't know the reasons, but that subtle vignette that's on the corners that is helping to funnel their eyes to the subject is working exactly how we want it. But if we cross that line and it becomes too dark, we're going to be kind of competing for their attention with the subject in the vignette going on. And it's going to feel unbalanced to them. It's going to feel awkward to them. Let's take a look at what I mean. So if we go in DxO Photolab 8 here, if we go to the creative vignette and we just turn this on, we have some controls here. Now we can click on this little button here. This is going to give us our center point. Now we can move this wherever we want it in the frame, right? That's a big difference from the lens vignette we were talking about a little while ago. We don't have this type of flexibility, but with a creative vignette, we do. We can pick where we want the center of it to be. So once I get that set, I'll put it there and then I'll just turn that off. And then we can do different things. I'm just going to darken this down so that we can kind of see the effects of the other tools. So this obviously changes the intensity, right? We can go to the right and make it white. We can go to the left and make it black. And we can obviously go somewhere in between to reduce the intensity of our vignette. Then we can change the midpoint. So we know that we set it on the bird, right? But how closely do we want this vignette coming to our subject, and how much safety zone, if you will, do we want? So if we look at this, we drag it to the left, you can see we're creating a greater safety zone, right? We're backing it away from our subject. We go to the right, we're bringing it in closer to our subject, and we're going to have less of a safety zone. So we can do something, whatever we want here based on the picture. There's no hard and fast rule. There's really no right or wrong answer for where the midpoint falls out. This is a creative decision that you will need to make on your photo. And lastly, we have the roundness, right? If we go to the left, we can kind of make it more of a square. And if we go to the right, we can make it more circular. And then I like to kind of keep this, quite honestly, right around the 50% range, because this gives us more of that oval shape, right? More of that egg shape. And that is the shape that I tend to gravitate towards when it comes to a vignette. But the real key here that we're going to be focusing on are the intensity and the midpoint, because these are going to control how closely it is to our subject and how intense it looks. Now, the mistake that we often see, or I often see with many photographers, is they bring the vignette kind of closer to the subject, and then they really add some intensity to it, and they kind of wind up with something like this. Now, this is what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about a vignette that is competing with our subject, right? I'm looking at that subject, but I can clearly see this dark line that's kind of going on around this photo, and that is kind of begging for my attention as well. And so this becomes a distracting photo, and this is where we're going to lose our viewer. They're just going to pass over an image like this because it just starts to become too confusing to them. Too much is going on. But if we were to maybe back off the midpoint just a little bit, maybe bring it down to like 55, and we were to back off on the intensity a little bit, maybe bring it down to like 35. Now we have something where the edges and the corners are still have a little bit of darkness to them, but we've eliminated the competition going on between the vignette and between our subject. And now we can gravitate the viewer's eyes towards our subject and get a much more pleasing photo. All right, guys, those are the 5 things that I see overused in photos all the time. Are you guilty of any of these? Let me know in the comments, and it's perfectly fine if you are.
You can't handle the truth!
Because I can guarantee you that all photographers at some point in their career are guilty of doing these things. I know I have been, especially early on in my career when I did, I thought, oh, this is cool. I would way overdo some of these different things, and it really didn't help the overall quality of my photos. So let me know if you suffer from some of these things from time to time as well. Hey guys, thank you so much for stopping by today. I appreciate your time. If you learned something from this video, please give it a thumbs up, and please consider subscribing to the channel as well. Don't forget to head down to the show notes where you can use that discount code Magnolia at DxO Photolab to save 15% off on all your purchases. And of course, also consider submitting your entry during the month of May to win a free copy. That's right, absolutely free, no purchase necessary version of DxO's Photolab 8. Until the next video, take care. Good luck with your wildlife.